Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Joni Clover where she shares her life as a pastor's kid and then a pastor's wife and how that shaped her into who she is and who God has called her to be. So let's get into the conversation with Joni. Joni, thank you for being a guest on our podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to share with us and share with our listeners, so thank you.
Oh, I'm happy to.
As we begin, could you share a little bit about your professional journey, some of the jobs you had and what that entailed?
Okay. I did a lot of staying home at the beginning with my children. When we first got married, I did try to venture out and get a job, and I did. I was the assistant manager at a fabric store where I met a lot of really wonderful people. One of them happened to be Roberta DeJanes at that time. That was really pretty cool. Then I started my family, and so I stayed home and I babysat quite often. And then I went back into the workforce and I worked at various different places. But after we moved out to where we live now, I ended up going back to work full time. I first started at a bank and worked there for a while. Then I went to Lamont and I worked there for a while. Then I ended up at EBS. Now, I ended up at EBS underneath a presence that I didn't know what I was getting into. But that was fine. Chuck Griffin actually got me that job with a wonderful letter that he wrote for me. And I was hired. And in about 6 months, I was elevated to manager. So then I was manager for the rest of my time at EBS. And at EBS, what we did was we worked with medical insurance. So medical claims for people that are self-funded through their employers. So there's a lot of personal contact that you end up having in that type of a job.
And you loved your job. You're recently retired, so that's exciting.
I am.
So what did you love about that job?
Probably the personal contacts that I got to have. You weren't just stuck there, not seeing or doing anything. I did get to venture out every once in a while and go to employer groups and see them and talk with them about the business. But I worked more with the people and the managers of the businesses and to help the people, because nobody understands insurance. I mean, let's just face it, they don't. I wouldn't have if I wouldn't have forced myself to learn it. And getting to help them do something that they know nothing about is encouraging to me.
So partially you approved or denied claims or services, but your main motivation there was helping people.
Right. So hopefully you're approving them and not denying them for the most part. Yes.
But in general, you're helping people navigate this system that's not always easy for people to understand.
Navigate electronically the system, navigate the idea of what their benefits are, and how to make that happen.
Okay. So, and you were there for over 20 years, correct? So,
I was.
And recently retired, so that's exciting. Congratulations to you on your retirement. And I'm sure it's been an adjustment for you, but hopefully a good adjustment.
It's been totally an adjustment for me. You think when you retire, you all feel free, and it's been a little bit of a struggle journey for me, but I'm adjusting. I was thankfully having time that I got to work part-time from home as I'm doing this. So that helped me just kind of wean out of it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, switching gears a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey when you first accepted Jesus and maybe when you became serious about Jesus?
Okay. I'm a pastor's daughter. So I was brought up in the church my entire life. We moved many times in my years. which was not necessarily a bad thing. That didn't really affect me that much to have to move. In the church we were in, it was thought that that's what was necessary to do, and the church itself moved the pastors from church to church. When I was about 8th or 9th grade, if I'm remembering right, is when I started teaching Sunday school. I taught first grade mainly. And that's when I started teaching Sunday school, and I'm not sure I ever quit after that. I was in a teen group for a while when we moved to Burlington, and I didn't teach all the time when we moved to Burlington, but for the most part I taught one thing or another. That again is touching people, it's touching lives. And I think that's probably where I came into my secular job, at EBS with touching people, is because it all started way back when I was a teenager, hopefully touching the lives of those children. I hopefully think that all the years that I've taught, and most of the time I taught were with teens, that I've planted some kind of a seed in them that sometime that will come back and they'll come back to Christ, because I feel that there's so many of them that they're there, they know it, they see it, but they're not necessarily following it. When I was 10 years old, I was about 10 years old, we were at church camp. My mom was pregnant with my little brother. That's when I first came to know Christ, at church camp in the summer, hot. I was young, 10 years old. You don't know a whole lot at 10 years old, but I knew the difference between what I was doing and what I should be doing. And so later in life, I loved Christ the whole time. I did. But to become, even though I was teaching school, I'm teaching Sunday school, I knew Christ. I did. I was living it, but there was still something there that I don't think that I was taking fully, evidently, because after Jay started preaching at Quincy, that was a tough time, especially for a while for me. I fought it. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be a pastor's wife. In fact, when I was a teenager, I literally prayed all the time that I would not be a pastor's wife. I guess God had other plans for me and gave me somebody who was going to be a pastor that I didn't even have a clue he was going to be a pastor at the time. So when we were at Quincy, I went to a women's meeting, and I was really touched, and this lady took me aside and talked to me and told me that I was hindering what God had planned for Jay because I was fighting it, and I should not be fighting it. It kind of made me mad at first. It really did, to be honest. And then shortly after that, we had evangelist come into the church down there, and he was kind of on the same level, and that's when I said, okay, I got to give it totally over. Not that I was away from God, but I wasn't totally there because I was fighting it so bad. I'm sorry. I didn't think I was going to do that. But God had the plan that that's what was important for our lives, and you could see that that was important for our lives because the church grew immensely from like 18 people to 80 people in the time we were there. It was about 3 years. And our children learned much from that. Maybe differently than what I learned from being a pastor's child. Being a pastor's child is a whole different life than not being a pastor's child. You are put on this pedestal as a pastor's child. You are treated differently from the congregation than other children are treated, which isn't necessarily bad, but you are treated differently.
And there are pros and cons to that.
And there are definite pros and cons to that. But you also are treated, I felt I was treated differently from my father, even though he loved us dearly. I have no doubt about that. But the time was not there. The time for being the child was overtaken from his time of being in the church. And I think that's one thing I didn't want, is to be that pastor's family where we didn't have time for our children.
And so I'm sure that was hard, especially with Quincy being an hour and a half drive, somewhere in that nature,
Yes.
that you would go down there on the weekends.
Yes.
And is a much different dynamic than growing up where you would move from place to place. I'm sure. Now, growing up as a pastor's kid, what were things that you learned because of that position? How are ways that Jesus shaped you, I guess?
Well, I think it's because my dad was always that giver. And I think that's what I got, is that giver, that helper, that person who was always there to help somebody else no matter what it was. Mm-hmm. My dad was always there. And that was Jesus coming out in him, because he cared, just like Jesus cares for everybody, no matter what their lifestyle is. No matter. My dad was that way. He cared for every single person, and he showed it in everything he did. He would be there to help them and help them through it, and accept them for no matter what they are. See them as a person and not for what they did. Mm-hmm. And that's what Jesus tells us to do. And so I think that's what I try to do, and that's what my father taught me.
And I'm sure there were times where that was easier than others for your dad to do, and I'm guessing that he didn't let you know when it was more difficult.
Absolutely not. They were very private. If there was anything that was going on between a congregation and him, it was always private between him and my mom. We could tell every once in a while there might have been something, but we never knew what. Yeah. That was never shared. And I also feel that was totally a God thing, because I didn't need to know. It could have molded me differently. God didn't want it to mold me differently. My dad didn't want it to mold me differently. And that's not what the Bible tells us to do. Yeah.
I would agree with that. And one of the reasons I asked that question is whether we're talking about a pastor's kid or just the children in the church. Sometimes us adults allow our pride to get in the way. And so are there words of advice you'd have for adults listening to how we can make sure we don't get in the way of the children and teens? We don't get in the way of Jesus for them. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I think so. We're not here to live the simple life. We're not walking the easy road. We're supposed to walk the road that is more challenging. And if you take the easy road, are you really doing what God is having us to do? So challenge yourself, and do as God is trying to tell you to do. So therefore you've got to listen to God and tell and do as he's instructing you to do. Everybody's to-do list is different. It's not the same, so I can't tell you what that list is. But it does say that coming together for God, coming together in fellowship, is what we're to do. The Bible tells us that. So I can say that is one thing that should be on your to-do list, is that going to church, being in fellowship together is on your to-do list. And you should walk that hard road and let God lead you on that hard road, because it's not us leading. You have to listen to God and let him lead you on that hard road. And there's going to be hard things. It's the hard road. So you need to have your sounding board person. Mine's my husband. Hopefully yours is your wife. And you can work through those situations together as you walk that difficult road.
And part of why I ask that is, our kids and grandkids, just the kids in the church, need to know that we're real people, but they don't need to get caught up in our disagreements.
Correct.
And I think that's in the church sometimes we allow petty things like the color of the carpet to be issues. And kids don't need to get caught up in those types of things. No. And I just think because of your perspective growing up in the church, and especially because your parents had led by such example of protecting you from those frivolous controversies, it seems, that we need to make sure that we do all we can so the church is a place where kids and teens feel like this is a comfortable place, a place that they can grow in grace and not get caught up in adult nonsense.
And that is totally true. And also we have to let them know that we are human too. Mm-hmm. We make mistakes just like they make mistakes. I've taught in Sunday school and told them many of my mistakes that I have made and how I overcame them. And I think I did that to show them that I'm not perfect, so they don't have to expect to be perfect. They just have to learn how to overcome them with God's help, to overcome those mistakes and to move on.
And it sounds like your investment in the kids was showing by you telling your shortcomings. You showed that it takes humility. Yeah. We have to have humility. It's not about just trying harder. It's about humbly coming before Jesus and allowing him to shape us. Now, as a pastor's wife, so you were pastor's kid and then a pastor's wife, yes. What were some things you learned from that experience?
That you're always a go-to person, number one. My mom was always the go-to, was always hands-on. Growing up at that point, we did a lot around the church. We didn't have people who mowed the lawn, shoveled the walks, cleaned the church. That's something we did. We did that as the children every single week. No one else did that for us. Being a pastor's wife, and because I was not there all week long, that isn't something that I was involved in. And maybe it's because of the time span of the years difference. There was always someone else that cleaned the church and mowed the lawn and shoveled the walks. But the other things that we did do a lot were going out and visiting people. When we were down there on the weekends, when there were people that came to the church or just to get to know them more, that is the things that we did a lot, was to go out and spend time with the people, since we only had the weekends to spend the time with the people. I didn't have any other duties except for I did teach Sunday school. I taught teens when I was down there. We didn't have any other ministries that I can remember except for that. Now, during the week, they had some ministries that they took care of, but I wasn't there during the week. So it was a little bit different than being full-time pastored somewhere.
Yeah, and time changes things, and responsibilities and roles. And even growing up, you were at many different churches, and all those, for the most part, you helped clean and shovel. So that was a pretty standard practice.
It was a standard practice.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was my dad's standard practice. That's why it happened. I don't know. But it was definitely every place we went.
Yeah. Well, that's... we all have childhood memories that I hope we look back fondly of, and I hope we look back fondly on those times and spending time with your siblings cleaning the church.
Yep.
So, but our life's journey, God uses to shape us and just to who we are. And Some of those memories are fun. Some of them are frustrating. Some of them are ones that we laugh at later, I guess. So, can you speak to how God has used your journey to shape you to who you are?
Well, I would say the giving part. I feel like I'm a giver. I like to do things for other people. I like to be available when necessary, just like teaching something. Maybe sometimes to a fault, because it's like, oh, they need that, I'll go do that. Oh, they need that, I'll go do that. And then you realize you can't do every one of them because time does not allow it. So you've got to totally go to God and say, which is the one that you want me to do? Where am I going to be used for a ministry in the best way I can do it? So, but I do try to be available when I can, even to maybe a ministry that maybe I'm not really that involved in, but yet I want to be available to do it when I can. Missions maybe is one thing. Missions is Jay's desire more than mine, but now that I don't have, a dozen kids at the house that I'm fostering or raising, I feel that I can go with him to something that is his desire to do. And so I've gone on a couple mission trips, another one's coming up. It is something that I'm giving. It's still in the giving mode that my dad instilled in me and that I've done all my life. And I feel that that's what Jesus did was give. He just gave constantly to anybody and everybody, no matter what. And so I feel that that's what God has given me to do as a ministry, is to give.
And you just alluded to it, fostering.
Yes.
How many kids did you foster over the years?
I'm only guessing somewhere around 30.
What led you guys to do that?
What led us to do that? Well, I don't know exactly. One year when I was a senior, my dad was not in the ministry. The only year I can remember he was not in the ministry when I was a baby, because he got very, very sick and he couldn't do it. But when I was a senior, we moved to Woodstock, Illinois, and my dad worked in the children's home, and so did my mom. I became good friends with somebody there, and when he got married, they were still friends. They actually moved to this area, and so Jay and I and him and his wife were friends. They then moved to Arizona, and when they moved to Arizona, they started fostering. I learned about that from them at that time, that they were fostering, and I don't know, it just something that went, I could do this, but I can't do this in this small house we live in Burlington. We can't do it. So we started praying what God wanted us to do, knowing that that house wasn't going to work, so therefore we had to have a different house, and God was going to have to get us the house, because we weren't getting it on our own, because we had already tried for 4 years and it wasn't working. So that is when we got the house we have now. We've been there ever since, and it's big enough, and we were able to then go through all of the classes to become foster parents. And I just feel like that is again in the giving mode. It's something that I was able to do because I care for people, to give a life to a child who wasn't getting a very good life, and I could maybe plant some seeds for that child.
And fostering is it can be very difficult in good times, because you don't know how long you'll have the child. Right. You may get the child back. Did you ever have a child more than once?
I had a child that came back for respite after they left our home. They came back for respite.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a very transient situation where, and you're talking about planting seeds with Sunday school, with kids and teens, and you're just trying to show the children that you come in contact with just love for and you're not exactly sure how long you'll have them sometimes.
You're not. And you don't know really what their lifestyle was.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be surprised by some of the things they do. And some of the things they do is because that's all they know. And so you're just teaching them what is more normal and appropriate and better choices.
Yeah, and just a way to show the love of Jesus. That's
Right.
That's something that you and Jay did for many years, and have many good memories that you've shared. Many difficult ones, I'm sure,
Yes.
but you've had a positive impact on those kids, even if it was just for a short while. But part of our conversation is just how God has shaped you, and talk about being a pastor's kid, being a pastor's wife, and how it's led you to be a giving individual. But I want to come back to that moment you had when Jay was pastoring in Quincy, and where you kind of just surrendered everything to Jesus. And each person listening is at has a different context in their life, and so it may be similar to yours, it may be completely different from yours, but the person who is just struggling with that surrender, do you have any words of advice for them?
Just have to listen to what God is telling you, because He's going to talk to you. If you're willing to listen, He's going to talk. And then when He talks to you, I suggest you just do what He tells you to do, because He has the plan. It's not your plan. If it was your plan, you'd be on the easy road. It's God's plan, and He knows best. And even though being on the hard road and doing God's plan isn't always the easy thing to do, it's still the right thing to do. And just open your heart and listen to Him. I guess that's all I have, is just listen to Him and do what He's telling you to do, whatever it is.
I think that's great advice, because you don't know who's listening. You don't know what they're going through, but you do know listening to God's voice is the best thing we can do.
Right.
So, well, thank you for sharing your story today. Thank you for sharing just how God has shaped you. And I know it's going to be encouraging and challenging for people listening. It was encouraging and challenging for me. I appreciate you and your spirit and just the evidence of God's grace in your life. Thank you for being here and a guest on our show today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.